A few months ago, I asked my viewers to rank every Soulsborne game in two different topics, by preference and by difficulty. Today, we're talking about the results of the preference poll, meaning I asked them to rank the games from their least to most favourite, giving each a placement of 8th place to 1st place. The lower the number, the better the score. It's golf rules. Before the poll, I asked each entrant to list the games in the series they had played as well, so that after the poll closed, I could go through each and every entry and remove the points for any of the games they had not played. That's why this took so long. After tallying the scores and deducting the points from players who hadn't played specific games, I worked out the overall averages, used a lot of division, and now we have the results. I'm Billy S, and this is my community's Soulsborne ranking, from worst to best. Tune in next week for the difficulty ranking. At number 8, we have Demon's Souls, which scored a total average of 6.29. For this video, the lower the average, the better the placement, going from a scale of 8 to 1, so 6.29 is pretty low, and I'm not surprised in the slightest. The games that have been less played by the community were always going to struggle in these polls, and Demon's Souls is the most difficult game to play out of the entire roster. Either you need a working PS3, a copy of the PS3 game that you can legally emulate online, or a PS5 with a copy of the remake. No matter what, you're going to have to pay out of pocket to even play the game, and of the 262 voters, only 147 of them had actually played Demon's Souls. It's a slow game, methodical yet archaic in its design. Healing is tied to consumables with no Estus flask equivalent to speak of. Weapons are extremely basic, having none of the weapon skills or fancy blades you're used to in future titles. Enemies are very basic, with simple AI, and the bosses are a mixed bag of puzzles that you need to overcome, which is some people's cup of tea, but I'm no fool. The larger Soulsborne fanbase loves a bombastic cinematic fight, and you just don't get those in Demon's Souls. You will fight Leechmonger, and you will love it. The levels are well designed. You've got classics like 1-1 Gates of Boletaria, 4-1 Island's Edge, 1-3 The Inner Ward, 3-1 The Prison of Hope. The stinkers aren't that bad in the grand scheme of things either. Where Demon's Souls likely loses a lot of the player base though is the world and character tendency systems. They are such a hit or miss mechanic that can unintentionally make your life a lot harder while playing. You're never allowed to explore in human form for fear of making the game harder and spawning in red phantoms so you're never at full health. And that's not a good feeling, as if you die when in human form, your world tendency shifts to black, which makes enemies stronger and you weaker. It sucks to have the cling ring in one of your ring slots just to have a whisper of HP for each level. Even the soundtrack is divisive, with the original PS3 release having such an experimental tone that doesn't fit the rest of the series, while the PS5 release goes too far in the other direction and makes the tracks so grandiose that they don't really fit the quality of the bosses on offer. It's an odd title. I do love Demon's Souls in my own way, but I can't deny that it's a tough game to crack on with, and with a fan base this large, friction is bound to make some people not want to try these older games. At number 7, we have Elden Ring Night Rain, which scored a total average of 5.38. Alongside Demon's Souls, Night Rain was the other game on the block that was struggling with the voters. Of the 262 who took our poll, only 144 of them had played Night Rain. Being the newest game, you would expect more people to have played it, right? But then you remember the type of game that Night Rain is, and suddenly things begin to make sense. Elden Ring Night Rain is a spin-off of Elden Ring that focuses on a different style of gameplay. It's a roguelite that has you exploring the land of Limveld in 40-minute games that eventually sees you facing off against a Night Lord at the end. These brand new bosses are the true draw of the game for a lot of fans, and they are fantastic fights that every Soulsborne fan owes it to themselves to experience at least once. But Night Rain is primarily a multiplayer game. You get into teams of 3 or 2 to tackle each run. You can go solo, but that requires a lot of knowledge of Night Rain and its mechanics to successfully survive, and that's what puts off a lot of players. Contrary to popular belief, as I feel PvP for example has always been popular in the Souls space, but most people don't want to be in games with other players. There are many reasons for this. Some of us simply prefer single-player experiences, some people don't have friends to play with and would rather not risk it with randoms, especially since the games don't have cross-play multiplat. Some people get anxiety playing multiplayer games because they don't want to let their teams down, and some people just don't have the patience to deal with 40-minute games. They add up and can feel quite lengthy, especially if you get to the Night Lord and immediately die. Those boss runbacks are brutal, and there are some players out there that just don't feel like it. Whatever the case, Night Rain being such an experimental title was always guaranteed to rank lower on this list, because its nature means that less players are going to get what they want out of it. I actually really like Night Rain, and I don't think I'd rank it this low personally, so if you want to see me remake my own Soulsborne ranking after Duskbloods comes out, which, being a Switch exclusive, that one probably will be landing low on this list, let me know. At number 6, we have Dark Souls 2, which scored a total average of 5.22. The last time I personally ranked the games, I had Dark Souls 2 in my last place spot, and I will tell you now, my thoughts have changed since then. And I think my community feels the same way, because for all of Dark Souls 2's struggles with being the black sheep of the trilogy, and those development issues that effectively made it into a completely different game to what it was originally envisioned by From Software, it's got that cult classic following, and I still enjoy booting it up and playing it. There is a vast world to discover in Drangleic, and aside from maybe Elden Ring, none of the other games come close to the variety of locales you explore here. You have a poisonous, smog-filled valley, an ancient pirate town, a ruin out on the seas, an icy citadel, a fiery keep submerged in lava, an underground civilization, and most importantly, 2 optional areas filled with glory holes all along the walls. You won't be able to unsee the Pharos Lockstone contraptions now. You're welcome. Dark Souls 2 has been very influential moving forwards. A lot of what Dark Souls 2 does well was taken and amplified in Elden Ring. Power stancing is perhaps the biggest feature, but something I didn't know until I did some research is that twin blades were first introduced in Dark Souls 2, taken away and only brought back for Elden Ring. Stone sword keys in Elden Ring are just like the Pharos Lockstones and Fragrant Branches of Yore from a mechanical perspective. Magic is extremely powerful to build around in Dark Souls 2 in ways I never really looked into, but I will take the community's word on it. Now, do I think Dark Souls 2's enemy placements leave a lot to be desired? Yup. Iron Keep, baby. Lost Bastille behind the petrified statue guy, baby. Trying to visit Ornifex without getting shotgunned by mages, baby. And there are too many bosses, with not enough of them getting the focus they deserve to stand out among the crowd. Something I talked about very recently in my boss roster ranking video. Go check that one out. And yet, despite the obvious flaws, there's just something about Dark Souls 2 that keeps me coming back. Maybe it is the fact that it feels like a different game to the rest of the series, sharing the through line of regular gameplay but with so many different flourishes and touches that make it stand out. Equipment that affects your stats, adaptability, 2 different forms of healing, both consumable and Estus, a more streamlined blacksmith system that introduced the gemstones that carried over to Dark Souls 3. When you look at it like that, it's no wonder Dark Souls 2 lands this high. But any game with Motoi Sakuraba composing the music for is going to be a bop. Even more so if it's the game that gave us Majula. At number 5, we have Dark Souls, which scored a total average of 4.31. The last of the oldies, we all recognize that Dark Souls is a classic, the blueprint for the rest of the series. Even the haters can agree that without Dark Souls, we wouldn't have the games they actually enjoy. But where I knew Dark Souls was going to struggle in this poll was in the game's level of friction. Try playing Elden Ring, then going back to play Dark Souls, and it's like night and day. One game is buttery smooth with omnidirectional rolling, the other is slower paced, methodical, and you will roll left, right, forwards, and backwards, and if you try to roll diagonally, the sniper I've put outside your house will take you out. Combat in Dark Souls is almost turn-based. Either you attack or your opponent attacks, with whoever's on defense needing to react accordingly. Parries are incredibly simple to land in Dark Souls due to the slower timing, and because movesets are less complex for both enemies and bosses, you'll be able to get more consistent at fighting your opponents. That level of consistency is appealing, but not something every gamer looks for. Bosses are mostly hits with a few misses that at the very least land in the iconically bad tier. Pinwheel and Bed of Chaos are truly painful fights for a vast majority of players, and I'm also going to throw Seath down there personally. But when you've got Artorias, Sif, Manus, Ornstein and Smo, Calamite, Taurus Demon, you can learn to ignore a few of the duds. The level design and world interconnectivity is where Dark Souls either gets die-hard fans or loses die-hard fans. You don't have access to a fast travel option until you reach the Lord Vessel, and even then you get a few specific bonfires you can warp between, which means you're forced to actually learn your routes through Lordran, and once you've completed an objective, you have to travel right back the way you came. Descending and reascending from Blighttown is a major sticking point for players because getting trapped in an area you find that brutal can be demoralizing. But on the other side of the coin, by forcing players to overcome that adversity, it builds them up to be better at the game in the long run. Dark Souls is all about pushing the boundaries of this game's friction with the player, but never overstepping, unless you get cursed. I also do think the second half of the game's reputation causes Dark Souls to falter in the rankings, with areas like Lost Izalith and Tomb of the Giants being particularly painful to traverse. You could even throw the Duke's Archives in there, as despite being a well-designed area, there's something about it that's exhausting every time I replay it. We're also still trapped in hell with a blacksmith system that forces a lot of enemy grinding to level certain weapons to certain affinities. You need to find a ton of embers and the blacksmiths that go with them, and the boss weapons are an even bigger pain as you need to upgrade regular weapons to a certain point before you can combine them with the boss soul. It's just not something a regular player will ever naturally come into contact with. If you're a fan of slower-paced games, Dark Souls is probably in your top 3 here, but with so many new Soulsborne fans coming in from Elden Ring and Dark Souls 3, it's no surprise that Dark Souls' heritage could only take it so far in today's modern landscape. And if you've played Dark Souls, you should parry that subscribe button. We're trying to reach 50,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and if you do subscribe, you'll have more chances to participate in these community ranking polls yourself. On to our next entry, which, this is going to be a shock. At number 4, we have Sekiro Shadows Die Twice, which scored a total average of 3.49. Yeah, that's right, I'm as shocked as you are. With how much love Sekiro receives across the Soulsborne and Souls-like fanbase, I was expecting it to be top 3, maybe even top 2, so not even reaching the podium, you can bet I am gagged. If I had to take a guess, I think that Sekiro barely missed out because of the ongoing debate that will continue to rage on for a millennia. Is it actually a Soulsborne game? The DNA of From Software is all over it, dodging and blocking gameplay with a focus on whittling down health bars to kill opponents and progress. A healing item that refreshes at the game's equivalent of checkpoints, with said checkpoints respawning enemies that are killed in the world. Bosses with health bars and arenas that you have to overcome to progress. An interconnected world with different locations to explore, obtuse NPC questlines that make you want to scream, a secret ending that is so stupid to obtain that it makes you want to cry. But then Sekiro is a parry-focused game, which is less about the actual HP of the bosses themselves, but more so about the brand new posture mechanic that has become completely mainstream in Souls-likes ever since. You love this shit. Max out an enemy's posture and they stun, allowing you to hit them with a death blow. It is so addicting when you get that gameplay flow down pat and you are just parrying, shing, 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 death blow, the boss is down in 20 seconds, let's go! You have prosthetic tools and a grappling hook that can help you out in situations where you need tailored tools for the job, firecrackers, flame vents, the shuriken, but these are your only tools to differentiate yourself from other players. There's not much build variety in Sekiro, you don't level up like an RPG, and that's where I think most people's criticisms lie. That, and Sekiro's focus on perfect blocking, boss pattern memorization, alongside avoiding perilous attacks, it can lead to a difficulty that is too much for a lot of the player base. I hate this phrase, but it is very much the get good sort of game that From Software was known for, and that barrier to entry is high. But for those who seek the thrill of the shinobi, you'll encounter one of the best games you've ever played. Unless you're my boyfriend, you can watch his Sekiro journey in this video we posted last year. It's actually iconic how good he is at the game despite viscerally wanting to turn off the PS5 at every instance. I'll talk more about Sekiro in next week's video with the difficulty ranking, as I think there's a little bit more to chew on there, but let me know your thoughts on Sekiro down below in the comments. At number 3, we have Dark Souls 3, which scored a total average of 3.47. By a mere difference of 0.02 points, Dark Souls 3 was able to push its way into the podium, and if we could only have one of the Souls trilogy up here, I do think Dark Souls 3 is the best choice. It's also the game that most of my voters played, with a total of 253 out of 262 voters playing it. Dare I say, I think Dark Souls 3 is the best game for any new Souls fan to start with. It's got enough modern conveniences like omnidirectional rolling, a faster healing animation, generous iframes, and a host of really cool weapons with weapon skills, while still giving you that traditional Dark Souls trilogy energy that you get from the first two games. The world design is bleak but intriguing, linear, as you'll be going from zone to zone with small intersections every now and then, like with the Cathedral, Smouldering Lake, and the split between going for Aldrich or going for Yhorm. But because the world is linear, the game's difficulty curve is incredibly clean. You will always feel powerful enough to take on the current area, while not being so powerful that you breeze through everything with ease, unless you use the Sellsword Twin Blades like I did, in which case Lothric is your oyster, have at it baby. In the same way that Dark Souls interconnectivity could be a boon for some and a hindrance for others, Dark Souls 3's linearity can be a positive or a negative depending on what you're feeling on the day. Enemies are a lot more complex, with movesets that actually challenge you from the jump. Lothric Knights are still the bane of my existence, and I've played through this game more than any other Souls title, and the revamped Silver and Black Knights from the first game are monsters on the battlefield. But it's the bosses that people most fondly remember from Dark Souls 3. This was the game where FromSoft perfected their formula, complete with every boss moveset having an enraged state mid-fight that changes the game, and some of the best music in the series to match it. Yuka Kitamura and Motoi Sakuraba's collaboration on this title is the soundtrack of my dreams. Vort, Pontiff, Abyss Watchers, Aldrich, Twin Princes, Dragonslayer Armor, Nameless King, Sister Frida, Slave Knight Gale, Soul of Cinder, the bops are bopping, and by the way, those are fantastic boss fights to boot. We have a few flops here: Ancient Wyvern, Gravetender and Great Wolf, Half-Light Spear of the Church, the Great Wood, they all come to mind, and a few of the areas feel a bit half-baked, like Profaned Capital and the Consumed King's Garden. Not to mention, Irithyll Dungeon is just an awful experience from start to finish thanks to those jailers. But overall, you can see the quality of Dark Souls 3, it is evident and clear. To the 9 voters that never played Dark Souls 3, I kinda think you need to fix that ASAP, trust and believe. At number 2, we have Bloodborne, which scored a total average of 2.59. Miyazaki's gothic, Lovecraftian horror adventure has resonated with the fans of From Software ever since 2015 when the game first came out. With its complete revamp of the formula to accommodate for a faster, more aggressive gameplay style that carried through to the rest of the company's future titles, Bloodborne is such a milestone achievement. Despite having one of the smallest weapon rosters in the series, it somehow has one of the deepest in technicality to compensate, because every weapon has 2 movesets. You can trick your weapon between 2 styles, changing the gameplay completely. A cane that becomes a whip, a small sword that becomes a greatsword, a stick that becomes a giant hammer. Some weapons come with ranged components that you can use to fire at your opponents, and that's not even taking into account the various guns and hunter tools on offer. Parrying in this game is done by putting a bullet right into your opponent at the best time, and that parry sound, it is the most satisfying in the series. Why do you think it's my subscribe notification? It is perfection. The world of Yharnam is twisted and warped, this layered city that you explore every part of, from the city streets to the cathedrals above, to the dregs below, and the outskirts beyond the walls. It's interconnected, but also linear in its own way, creating a more focused gameplay path, but with a little more freedom than Dark Souls 3. Enemies are just a blast to fight, their designs are horrific, you can fist a pig, and the Hunter v Hunter encounters are flawless. The soundtrack is dripping with that gothic atmosphere, with some of the most iconic tracks in the series coming from here. German's theme, Lady Maria's theme, Ludwig's theme, Gascoigne's theme, hell, they even managed to make a music box sound threatening with Wet Nurse. The bosses are more of a mixed bag though. When they hit, they hit. When they miss, they're the One Reborn followed by Micolash, Host of the Nightmare, which is my Nightmare Blunt rotation. Bloodborne's got a lot of replayability too with the Chalice dungeons, keeping you going back for more. Blood gem farming, getting better versions of your weapons, or just playing the game again with a new main weapon to see how it feels. It all comes together to create a truly spectacular experience that is only marred by a few short notes. One is the healing system. It's not a problem for experienced players because we're not dying as much, so we're not wasting as many blood vials, and we can afford to buy some from the shop in the Dream, but new players will end up running the Central Yharnam farming route for blood vials, and it will take away some of the game's momentum. Two is that the lanterns that act as checkpoints kinda suck. You always have to go back to the Hunter's Dream to teleport anywhere else, which becomes a chore when the loading times aren't the quickest. Sure, you go back to the Dream to level up, upgrade gear, etc., but if you're just looking to get somewhere else, or even just reload the enemies in an area, the lanterns do not help out at all. 3 is that if you want to use custom Chalice dungeons to your benefit, you do need PS Plus. You want the iconic Comfortbuka farming Chalice? PS Plus, baby. Honestly, the fact that those are such minor nitpicks sets the precedent for Bloodborne's quality, and that's before you account for the DLC just adding some of the best areas, weapons, and bosses into the game for funsies. The amount of stuff to do here is off the charts. It's actually impressive that Bloodborne landed this high to me, because I assumed as a PlayStation exclusive it'd get raked over the coals, but because it was on the PS4, which is one of the best-selling consoles of all time, it was able to overcome the same issues that Demon's Souls had. But it couldn't overcome my community. At number 1, we have Elden Ring, which scored a total average of 2.34. Even before I went in and deducted points for all the games people didn't play, Elden Ring was in the number 1 spot and nothing changed. If you are looking for the Soulsborne game with the most to do, Elden Ring is your guy. It's an open-world Souls game that is somehow balanced to near perfection. Split up into these vast regions within the lands between, you slowly make your way around the continent while conquering catacombs, delving into legacy dungeons, and slaying a whole manner of beasties and bosses along the way. The level of freedom is unmatched. Build variety is beyond anything we've ever seen in the series, and no matter what you want to achieve, you have a way to go about it. Want to walk around in tanky armor and bonk everything? Go off, queen. Want to wave a wand around and do magic? Have at it, diva. What about a Spellblade build that has you both using offensive and defensive capabilities, or a Madness build, or a Status Effect build, or a Bow build? There's equipment for that, ladies and gentlemen. So many bosses around the world give you ample opportunity to fight whatever you want with whatever build you want. Mess around and find out. That is the philosophy of Elden Ring. I think it says a lot that despite the lands between being one of the biggest maps in gaming, I can still map out a majority of the locations in my head. I know how to get through Caelid, or Liurnia, or Altus, but I also know where all the fun secrets are, or where the hidden paths are that take you to places you don't expect. Then you throw the DLC into the mix, which is effectively like adding a second campaign that is the same length as the original Dark Souls onto Elden Ring, and you have the best bang for your buck in the entire franchise. Nothing else comes remotely close. Characters are intriguing, be they the bosses themselves or the NPCs you interact with. You've got a few different flavors of ending to work towards with them, and even some hidden bosses you wouldn't find off the beaten track. Fortisax and Placidusax, Malenia and Moog, all prime examples. The music is phenomenal, easily one of the best soundtracks on offer, or even the world themes as you explore are just ambient enough to get stuck in your head, and the legacy dungeons you explore are some of the most well-designed locations in the franchise. If you can see it, you can go to it, and Leyndell is still the pinnacle for me. It'll take a real curveball in their future projects to unseat that as my favorite area in the series. And with such a big game comes so much lore, so many theories, so many nooks to discover. It created a community that is so dedicated to Elden Ring that it tops the charts here on YouTube. Makes me wish I had more Elden Ring related topics to write about, because besties, I want to capitalize. Do I think it's a perfect game? No. I think needing to do serious research just to get a cool build together can be a bit tedious, though I imagine actually going in-game to get all those items can be quite entertaining since you'll be playing a lot of the game out of order to do so. This is more of a personal preference thing though, I'm kind of just a pick something up and go with it sort of guy. Some of the boss fights feel a bit too much like padding, but part of that is just accepting that there is a difference between the main story bosses that you face and the Erdtree Burial Watchdog you beat up half an hour ago. And I really couldn't give a fuck about the crafting system. I'm sure it's useful, but you couldn't pay me to interact with a crafting system. It's a trope of open world games. I recently dealt with it in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and I'm just so fucking done with it. But what I'm not done with is Elden Ring, which is officially my community's favorite Souls game. Is it a shock when so many new players came in because of Elden Ring, expanding our lovely medium? Without Elden Ring, I might not have gained enough traction to even make these videos, so thank you very much, Miyazaki, my man. Be sure to tune in next week when the second half of this poll gets revealed, as I talk about my community's rankings of the Soulsborne game's difficulty. Will Elden Ring stay at the top? Can Night Rain or Demon Souls claw their way from the bottom? Tune in to find out, and I'll see you then. Adios.